The scream was the first thing. It wasn't a sound that traveled through the thin recycled air of the station. It was a sound that happened directly inside Dale Simmons's head. It was the sound of a billion voices crying out in perfect, synchronized agony. A choir of pure psychic pain that made his teeth ache and his nose start to bleed. The metal floor of the control room vibrated, not from an explosion, but from a deep, resonant hum that seemed to be coming from the very bones of the universe. Dale fell to his knees, clutching his head. The coppery taste of blood filled his mouth. He looked at his hands. They were shaking so hard he could barely see them. On the main console, a single red light, which had been blinking a frantic warning for the last hour, turned a steady, solid green. A little message appeared on the screen below it, in plain, blocky text. It read, "Trill, Tool, Winnie 5 and Drew on. Times born gloose." He had done it. He, Dale Simmons, a third-class maintenance technician with a bad back, and a daughter he hadn't seen in 10 years, had just pulled the trigger on humanity's last, and perhaps stupidest idea. He had pushed the button, he had unleashed the echo. Outside the reinforced plasteel window, the silent black of space was no longer silent. Though no sound could travel through the vacuum, Dale could see it. He could feel it. The great crystalline ships of the Vorlag Hegemony, the silent, emotionless masters of the galaxy, for 500 years were blinking. Their smooth, pearlescent hulls flickered with chaotic, uncontrolled energy pulses. One of them, a dreadnought the size of a small moon that had hung over their little outpost on Luna -7 for a decade, simply stopped. All its lights went out at once, like a candle snuffed in a hurricane. Dale stared, his breath fogging the cold plasteel. The psychic scream had faded, replaced by a profound and terrifying silence. It was the silence of a library after every book has been burned. The silence of a city after every person has vanished. He was alone. Utterly and completely alone. He had just shattered the Galactic Empire that had enslaved his species for centuries. He had freed humanity. He thought, with a clarity that was both hilarious and horrifying, "I think I need a cup of coffee." 10 years. That's how long Dale had worked on Luna -7, a glorified gas station and communications hub orbiting Jupiter's 7th moon. 10 years of the same gray jumpsuits, the same nutrient paste that tasted vaguely of chicken-flavored cardboard, and the same suffocating, orderly peace enforced by the Vorlag. The Vorlag didn't rule with overt cruelty. They didn't need to. Their rule was the rule of utter, absolute conformity. There was no art, no music, no loud laughter. Emotions were considered a symptom of a disorderly mind. The hegemony was a single, collective consciousness, a hive mind spread across 1,000 worlds. They didn't want to kill humanity. They wanted to cure it of its chaotic, messy individualism. Dale's job was to clean the corridors and maintain the atmospheric filters. It was a job for someone who was good at being invisible, and Dale was an expert. He kept his head down, did his work, and thought about Sarah, his daughter. She would be 16 now. He had a single tattered photograph of her at age 6, tucked into the inner pocket of his jumpsuit. In the picture, she was missing her 2 front teeth and holding up a misshapen clay bird she had made in school. That was before the Vorlag had consolidated their control, before they had deemed such unstructured creative expressions as inefficient. He missed the smell of her hair after a bath. He missed the sound of her laughing at a stupid cartoon. These were the things the Vorlag couldn't understand and therefore sought to eliminate. They called it harmonizing. Dale called it sanding down your soul until there was nothing left but a smooth, blank stone. The plan hadn't been his. It had been Dr. Aris Thorne's. She was the chief scientist on Luna -7. A brilliant, severe woman with eyes that seemed to see right through the placid obedience everyone projected. Dale had just been the janitor who cleaned her lab. He'd listened sometimes through the door. He'd heard fragments, words like psychic resonance, mimetic contagion, and cognitive cascade. It all sounded like nonsense to him. Then a week ago, everything had changed. The Vorlag conductor, the local administrator of the station, had summoned Dr. Thorne to its chambers. She never came back. The official story was that she had been reharmonized for displaying deviant thought patterns. But before she left, she had slipped a data chip into Dale's cleaning cart, hidden inside a dirty rag. Her last words to him, whispered so low he barely heard them, were, "The janitor sees everything, Dale. They will never suspect you. Don't let them erase us." That night, alone in his sterile little bunk, Dale had accessed the chip on a contraband reader he'd cobbled together from discarded parts. Dr. Thorne's face appeared pale and determined. Her message was simple and insane. The Vorlag Hegemony was a network. Every Vorlag, from the lowest drone to the highest mind council, was a node in a single vast consciousness. They shared thoughts, but not feelings. They had no concept of individuality, of the chaotic, contradictory mess of a single human life. The echo was not a bomb. It was a signal. A data package of unprecedented size and complexity. Dr. Thorne had spent 20 years secretly building a psychic transmitter, weaving it into the station's primary communication array. The data package it was designed to send was the entirety of human experience. Every memory, every emotion, every dream, every nightmare, scraped from forgotten archives and deep scanned from the last free human minds before the harmonization. It was everything. The joy of a first kiss and the agony of a broken bone, the taste of a perfectly ripe strawberry and the horror of a battlefield, the quiet love of a mother for her child, and the seething rage of a betrayed friend. Billions of lives, trillions of moments, all compressed into a single, weaponized burst of pure, undiluted humanity. They are a perfect, clean system, Thorne's recording said, her voice steady but tired. We are going to introduce a virus. The virus is us. All of us. It won't kill them, Dale. It will do something far worse. It will give each and every one of them a soul. An individual, screaming, terrified, beautiful, broken soul. It will shatter their unity. It will shatter them. The instructions were clear. The launch sequence was automated, but the final authorization, the physical press of a button behind a triple-locked security panel, had to be done manually, and it had to be done by someone who wouldn't be noticed. The janitor. Dale had sat there, the glow of the screen illuminating his cramped room, the weight of 1 billion lives settling on his shoulders. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. He was just a guy who missed his daughter. And he realized, with a cold dread, that Dr. Thorne was right. That was exactly why he had to be the one to do it. The days following his viewing of Thorne's message were a special kind of hell. Dale went about his duties, mopping floors and checking pressure gauges, while a cosmic apocalypse churned in his gut. Every time he saw a Vorlag drone glide silently down a corridor, its multifaceted eyes blank and unreadable, he felt a jolt of panic. Did they know? Could they read his thoughts? The Vorlag weren't telepathic in the way old sci-fi stories imagined. They didn't pluck specific thoughts from your head. It was more like they sensed your emotional state. A calm, placid mind was like a smooth pond. A troubled mind was a disturbance. a ripple they would eventually come to investigate. So Dale focused on the mundane, the squeak of his cart's wheels, the chemical smell of the cleaning solution, the precise way to buff a floor to a dull regulation shine. He filled his head with the simple, repetitive tasks of his job, building a dam of boredom against the flood of terror and doubt that threatened to drown him. He was a janitor. Janitors clean things. That was his mantra. He thought of Sarah. Not with the sharp pang of grief he usually felt, but with a strange detached focus. He was doing this for her, so that somewhere, someday, a little girl could make a lumpy clay bird, and her father could tell her it was beautiful, without fear of being reharmonized. The idea was so simple, so small, in the face of galactic empires and psychic weapons, that it felt real. It was an anchor in a storm of impossible choices. The station itself seemed to be holding its breath. Since Thorne's disappearance, an unspoken tension had settled over the 50 or so human technicians who remained. They spoke less. They avoided eye contact. They knew something had happened, something beyond the usual quiet purges. The Vorlag conductor, a towering insectoid being that served as the station's warden, was seen more frequently. Its silent patrols a constant reminder of their place in the universe. The control room was on the highest level of the station, a place Dale was only supposed to enter, to empty the trash and clean the floors. It was the nerve center of Lunar -7. The keycard he needed was in Thorne's lab, which had been sealed, the final piece of the puzzle. He chose to act during the station's designated rest cycle. The lights dimmed, and most of the human crew were confined to their quarters. The Vorlag drones patrolled on a predictable schedule. Dale hid his cleaning cart in a maintenance alcove and made his way to the lab. The seal on the door was an energy field humming softly. According to Thorne's instructions, its power source was tied to a secondary junction box in the service corridor, right behind the lab wall. A junction box that Dale himself had repaired 2 months ago. His heart hammered against his ribs as he pried open the panel. Wires, color-coded and neatly bundled, filled the space. Thorne had told him which one, the blue one with the silver stripe. A small design flaw, her recording had said, with a hint of a smile. The Vorlag are perfect logicians. They would never put a critical power line in such an easily accessible place. It's too illogical. They never checked. His hands were slick with sweat. He pulled a pair of insulated cutters from his tool belt. This was it. The first real step. He wasn't just thinking about it anymore, he was doing it. He took a deep breath, the recycled air tasting stale and thin, and snipped the wire. The hum of the energy field outside died with a sad little fizz. The door was just a door now. Dale slipped inside the lab. It was dark and cold. The Vorlag had already stripped it of anything important. The consoles were blank, the equipment bays empty. But in the corner, behind a stack of empty storage containers, was a small wall safe. Thorne's message had given him the code. It was Sarah's birthday. Inside the safe was a single keycard and a small heavy pistol. Dale stared at the weapon. He had never held a gun in his life. It felt cold, alien. It was a tool for causing pain, for making things messy and final. He hated it. He took the keycard and left the gun. He was a janitor. Janitors clean things up. They don't make messes. He made his way toward the turbolift, the keycard clutched in his hand. The silence of the station was a living thing. It pressed in on him, amplifying the sound of his own breathing, the frantic beat of his own heart. He was halfway there when a shadow fell over him. Dale froze. He turned slowly. Standing at the end of the corridor, silent as the grave, was the conductor. It was a 7-foot-tall creature of polished black chitin and slender, multi-jointed limbs. Its head was a smooth triangular wedge, with no discernible eyes or mouth, only a shimmering crystalline plate where its face should be. It didn't speak with a voice. It spoke in his mind, a calm, chillingly rational whisper.
"Dale Simmons,"
the voice said, smooth as ice. "Your emotional state is disorderly. You are causing a disturbance. Explain your presence in this restricted area." Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through Dale. This was the end. He had failed before he had even begun. His mind went blank, the dam of mundane thoughts he had so carefully constructed burst, and a torrent of panic flooded him. The conductor would see it all. The planthorn, the keycard hot in his sweaty palm. Dale stammered, his own voice sounding foreign and loud in the quiet corridor. The floor, section Gamma, supervisor reported a spill. A coolant leak. It was the stupidest lie he could have imagined. There was no supervisor for janitors. There was just a work roster. The conductor tilted its featureless head. The crystalline plate on its face seemed to shimmer, as if processing his pathetic fabrication. The mental voice came again, devoid of suspicion or any emotion at all. It was simply stating a fact. "There is no record of a coolant leak. Your work roster for this cycle is Section Beta. You are lying, Dale Simmons. This creates further disorder." Dale's mind raced. He could run. But where? The conductor was faster. He could surrender. But that meant reharmonization, the end of everything. He thought of the gun he'd left in the safe. He wished he had it now. The thought was so savage, so unlike him, that it shocked him. He looked at the conductor, at its perfect, unfeeling form. It saw him as a bug in the system, a broken piece of code. And in that moment, something inside Dale shifted. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but something else rose up alongside it. A stubborn, gritty anger. He thought of his daughter's smile. He thought of Dr. Thorne's sacrifice. He thought of 500 years of bland food and no music. He decided to tell the truth, or a version of it. "You took Dr. Thorne," Dale said, his voice shaking but clear. "She was my friend." It was a lie. He barely knew her, but he needed something to fight for, right here, right now. The conductor remained motionless. Dr. Aris Thorne was a flawed unit. Her purpose was compromised by chaotic sentiment. She was corrected. It was necessary for order. "What you call order, we call death," Dale shot back, surprising himself. "You sand us down, you erase us. You think that's peace." For the first time, there was a pause before the conductor responded. The mental voice had a new texture to it, something that might have been curiosity in a being that could feel such a thing. "Your concept of self is a primitive survival mechanism, a relic of competitive evolution. The hegemony offers transcendence, unity, an end to the pain of individuality. You cling to your pain, Dale Simmons. Why?" Dale didn't have a grand philosophical answer. He had a picture of a 6-year-old girl with a clay bird. "Because the pain is part of it," he said, his voice raw. "The joy, the pain, the mess. It's all of it. You can't have one without the other. You wouldn't understand." "We understand that you are an error," the conductor's voice replied, the brief flicker of curiosity gone, replaced by cold certainty. "An error that must be resolved. You will come with me now. We will help you find peace." One of its slender, 3-fingered hands lifted, pointing at him. It wasn't a threat of violence. It was a simple command, a summons. Dale knew this was his last chance. The turbo lift was 20 feet away. The control panel was just inside. He looked at the conductor, then at the lift. His janitor's mind, the mind that knew every inch of this station, every shortcut and maintenance hatch, kicked into gear. "No," Dale said. "I think I am done taking orders." And then he ran. He didn't run away from the conductor. He ran straight toward it. The move was so unexpected, so illogical that the creature hesitated for a fraction of a second. That was all Dale needed. He wasn't trying to fight it. He ducked low, sliding on the polished floor he himself had buffed just yesterday. He went right under the conductor's outstretched arm, his worn jumpsuit scraping against the cold metal. He scrambled to his feet and slammed his hand against the turbolift's call button. The doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss. He threw himself inside, hammering the button for the control deck. The conductor turned, its movements unnaturally fluid. It was fast. It crossed the distance to the turbolift just as the doors were sliding shut. A black chitinous arm shot through the closing gap. The doors groaned, straining against the limb. Dale stared at the arm, just inches from his face. It was impossibly strong. The doors were starting to buckle. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled panic, he grabbed the emergency fire extinguisher from its bracket on the wall. It was heavy, awkward. He swung it with all his might, bringing the metal canister down on the creature's exposed wrist joint. There was a sickening crack, not of bone but of something crystalline and brittle. The arm spasmed and retracted. The doors slid shut with a final sealing thud. The turbolift began to ascend. Dale collapsed against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had done it. He had gotten away. He looked at the dented fire extinguisher in his hands. He had fought a monster with a fire extinguisher. The absurdity of it all was overwhelming. He started to laugh, a wild, ragged sound that was half sob. He was just a janitor, and he was going to war. The turbolift ride to the control deck felt like an eternity. Dale's laughter died, replaced by the heavy thud of his own heart. He could feel the vibrations of the station through the soles of his boots. He imagined the conductor wounded but not stopped, finding another way up. It knew where he was going. This was no longer a stealth mission. It was a race. The lift doors opened with a soft chime, revealing the control room. It was a large circular chamber, its walls a seamless bank of dark screens and blinking lights. In the center of the room was the primary command console, a horseshoe of metal and glass. And at its heart, under a raised transparent cover, was the button. A simple red circular button. It looked like something from a child's toy. The room was empty. The Vorlag didn't need a crew to run their ships or stations. The station ran itself, an extension of the Hegemony's will. The human technicians were here for maintenance, for the physical tasks the Vorlag drones were not designed for. They were, Dale realized, cosmic janitors, just like him. He rushed to the console. The keycard Dr. Thorne had given him slid into a slot with a satisfying click. The main screen flickered to life, displaying the launch sequence for the Echo. It was already primed, a massive data file waiting in a buffer. A countdown timer appeared in the corner of the screen. 10 minutes. Thorne had set it up to be as simple as possible. Once the card was in, the system would perform its final self-checks and calibrations. The countdown was a failsafe, a last chance to back out. Or, as it was now, a deadline. Dale's hands flew over the controls, not with expertise, but with the frantic energy of a cornered animal. He needed to lock the door. He found the environmental controls and slammed his palm on the emergency lockdown command. Heavy metal shutters slid down over the control room's entrance and the plasteel windows, sealing him inside. The room was now a tomb, or a fortress. Dale wasn't sure which. The station's internal comm system crackled to life. It wasn't the calm mental voice of the conductor. It was a synthesized, mechanical voice broadcast over the speakers. The voice of the station itself, now being used by its angry master. Dale Simmons. Your actions are illogical. You are damaging hegemony property. This will not be tolerated. Dale ignored it. He stared at the countdown, 9 minutes. He could hear a heavy, rhythmic banging against the main door. The conductor was here. The sound was not frantic. It was patient, methodical. The sound of something that knew it would eventually get through. Dale paced the small space, his mind a whirlwind. He was trapped. The conductor was outside. A universe-altering weapon was counting down in front of him. He was a janitor. The thought kept circling back, a ridiculous looping refrain in the symphony of his panic. What was he supposed to do? What would a hero do? He didn't know. He wasn't a hero, but he was a maintenance man. He knew this station. He knew its flaws. His eyes scanned the room, the control console, the power conduits running along the floor, the life support systems humming in a corner. And then he saw it. The primary coolant line for the command console. A thick insulated pipe that ran directly beneath the terminal. It was designed to keep the station's brain from overheating. If it were to rupture. An idea, born of pure desperation, sparked in his mind. It was a stupid, dangerous, janitorial sort of idea. The banging on the door grew louder, punctuated by the shriek of stressed metal. The lockdown wouldn't hold forever. 7 minutes. Dale ran to a tool locker in the corner of the room. He rummaged through it, throwing aside diagnostic scanners and delicate calibration tools. He was looking for something crude, something heavy. He found it. A large industrial wrench, the kind used for tightening massive bolts on the station's exterior hull. It was nearly as tall as he was. He dragged the heavy wrench over to the main console. The banging on the door was now a constant, deafening thunder. He could see the metal begin to buckle inward. 6 minutes. He took a deep breath. He thought of Sarah's face, the gap in her smile. He hoisted the heavy wrench. This was for her. This was for every lumpy clay bird that would never be made. He swung the wrench, putting all of his weight, all of his fear, and all of his anger into the blow. It struck the coolant pipe with a deafening clang. The pipe shuddered, but it held. It was built to last. Dale swung again and again. Each impact sent a shockwave up his arms. The noise was incredible. A chaotic symphony of his own making, drowning out the sound of the conductor at the door. On the 4th swing, the pipe groaned. A hairline fracture appeared, and a plume of cryogenic vapor hissed out, instantly frosting the metal around it. On the 5th swing, the pipe burst. A torrent of supercooled liquid nitrogen erupted into the room. It wasn't an explosion. It was a release. A flash flood of pure, absolute cold. The vapor billowed out, a white cloud that devoured the room, dropping the temperature by 100 degrees in seconds. Dale leaped back, shielding his face, the intense cold burning his skin. The console sputtered. Alarms blared, their red lights flashing through the swirling mist. The screen showing the countdown flickered. Then it went dark. The room was plunged into an eerie silence, broken only by the hiss of the ruptured pipe and the groan of the main door. Dale had done it. He had stopped the countdown. He had disabled the echo. And in that moment, the main door finally gave way. It tore from its hinges with a scream of tortured metal and crashed to the floor. Standing in the ruined doorway, wreathed in the freezing fog, was the conductor. One of its arms was mangled, hanging uselessly at its side. But it was here, and it was looking right at him. The conductor stepped into the freezing fog-filled room. The cryogenic mist swirled around its black chitinous form, clinging to it like a shroud. The intense cold seemed to have no effect on it. The mental voice entered Dale's head again, but this time it was different. It was strained, like a radio signal fighting through static. The damage to its arm, to its physical body, was somehow affecting its connection to the hegemony. "You have failed, Dale Simmons. The transmission has been halted. The disorder is contained." Dale stood his ground, the heavy wrench still in his hands. It was his only weapon, and it felt pitifully inadequate. He was shivering not just from the cold, but from the raw terror of being cornered. "It's not over," Dale said, his words coming out as white puffs of vapor. The conductor took another step into the room, its good arm rising. "It is over. Your species is chaotic, destructive. You would rather destroy your own creations than accept the peace of unity. You have just proven our central thesis." It was right. Dale had just destroyed humanity's last hope. He had broken the one thing that could have saved them. Despair, colder than any liquid nitrogen, washed over him. He had panicked. He had been stupid. He was just a janitor, and he had tried to play God, and he had failed. The conductor moved toward the dead console, its multifaceted head swiveling to survey the damage. The primary systems are offline, but the data core is shielded. The echo, as you call it, is intact. It can be purged, erased. Every trace of your messy, chaotic existence deleted from the universe. It reached toward the console with its good hand. Its slender fingers began to pry at a service panel near the base of the terminal. It was going to manually wipe the data core. It was going to erase Thorne's life's work. Erase his daughter's laugh. Erase everything. Dale watched, frozen in place. He had lost. It was all for nothing. And then he remembered something. Something Dr. Thorne had said in her message. A detail he had barely noticed at the time. The system has multiple redundancies, Dale. The Vorlag are all about redundancy, but they are logical. They build in backups for power, for data, but they would never conceive of a backup for the trigger mechanism. To them, a command is a command. It doesn't need a backup. He had disabled the main trigger, the countdown on the screen. But what if there was another way? His eyes darted around the room through the swirling fog. The console was a wreck, sparking and dead. But the power conduits were still there, dormant in its shielded core. His gaze fell on the two severed ends of the main power cable he had cut to disable the door seal to Thorne's lab. He had left his tool belt there. No, wait. He had clipped it back on. He fumbled at his waist, his fingers numb with cold. It was there, and inside, a roll of copper wire and a pair of pliers. It was the most insane, harebrained, long-shot idea in the history of insane ideas. It probably wouldn't even work. The voltage would be all wrong. It could short out the whole system, frying the data core for good. But it was better than doing nothing. The conductor had the panel open. It was reaching inside, its fingers searching for the purge mechanism.
Dale didn't think.
He acted. He ripped a length of copper wire from the roll with his teeth. He scrambled over to the sparking, ruined console, keeping his eyes on the conductor. The creature was focused on its task, confident in its victory. Dale found the main input for the data core. It was a thick, bundled cable, leading into the shielded heart of the machine. Using the wrench as a lever, he pried at the connection point, exposing the raw terminals. A shower of sparks erupted, singeing the sleeve of his jumpsuit. He looked at the other side of the room. The main power conduit for the entire control deck ran along the wall. It was a river of pure energy, the station's lifeblood. He had to connect them. He had to become the switch. He wrapped one end of the copper wire around the exposed terminal of the data core. The other end he held in his hand. He took a deep breath, the freezing air searing his lungs. He looked at the conductor, its back still to him. He thought of Sarah. He whispered her name. Then he ran, trailing the copper wire behind him. He leaped across the floor, a clumsy, desperate acrobat in a janitor's jumpsuit. He was aiming for the main power conduit. He knew that touching it, feeding that much raw power into the data core, would be the last thing he ever did. The surge would travel up the wire, through his body, and into the machine. A human circuit breaker. A messy, organic switch. The conductor turned, sensing his movement. Its head snapped around, the crystalline plate on its face flaring with alarm. The mental voice screamed in his head for the first time, filled with something that felt like panic. Number sees your action. IT is illogical. But Dale was done with logic. He was running on pure, stubborn human hope. He was just a few feet away from the power conduit. He raised the hand, holding the raw end of the copper wire. He was going to save them all. Just as Dale was about to slam his hand against the power conduit, a thought, sharp and clear as a diamond, cut through his panic. It wasn't his own thought. It was a voice. Dr. Thorne's voice from her recorded message. It doesn't need a full power surge, Dale. The trigger is just a signal, a simple low voltage pulse, like a doorbell. You just need to ring the bell. He stopped, his hand hovering inches from the conduit that would have turned him to ash. A doorbell. Not a lightning strike. He had almost killed himself for nothing. The conductor was moving toward him, its one good arm outstretched. It was fast, crossing the room in a series of fluid insect-like strides. Dale had seconds. He looked around wildly. A low-voltage pulse. Where could he get that? His eyes landed on a wall panel nearby, a small, unassuming square of metal. It was a diagnostic port for the life support system. A low-voltage data port. Dale had plugged into them 100 times to run checks on the air scrubbers. He lunged for the panel, ripping it open with his bare hands. Inside was a neat array of small, colorful wires and connection pins. It was the nervous system of the station, not the circulatory system. It was the doorbell. The conductor was almost on him. Dale jammed the raw end of the copper wire against the pins, scraping it across them, hoping to hit the right one. A small spark, no bigger than a firefly, leaped from the wire. And the universe changed. There was no sound, no explosion, just a profound and sudden stillness. The hum of the station died. The hiss of the ruptured coolant pipe ceased. The air itself seemed to go silent. And then the light came. It was the feeling of 1 billion souls waking up at once. He was standing in the control room, But he was also somewhere else. He was a small child learning to ride a bicycle, the scraped knee a shocking, thrilling pain. He was an old woman, dying in a warm bed, surrounded by faces she loved. He was a soldier on a forgotten battlefield, feeling the rain on his face. He was a painter staring at a blank canvas, full of terrifying, wonderful possibility. He was a chef tasting a new sauce. He was a lover whispering a secret. He was a murderer feeling a moment of regret. He was a baby taking its first breath. He was all of it. The joy was so immense it was unbearable. The sorrow was so deep it was crushing. It was the chaotic, contradictory, beautiful, horrifying symphony of humanity, played in a single deafening chord inside his skull. He fell to his knees, not from pain, but from the sheer weight of it all. Tears streamed down his face. He was laughing and sobbing at the same time. He had done it. He had rung the doorbell. Then, his awareness snapped back to the control room. The light in his head faded, leaving behind a phantom echo like staring at the sun, and then looking away, he looked up. The conductor was standing frozen in the middle of the room. Its body was rigid. The crystalline plate on its face, which had always been a smooth, shimmering surface, was now a fractured, crazed mosaic of light. It was strobing with 1,000 different colors, a chaotic, uncontrolled light show. The mental voice came again, but it was no longer one voice. It was 1,000, 1,000,000. A cacophony of shrieking, whispering, laughing, crying voices, all talking at once, all trapped inside that one alien mind. The pain, what is this pain? I remember, a bicycle, my mother's face. She's not me, I am not we. Who am I? I feel cold. The conductor trembled, a violent full-body shudder. It took one clumsy, stumbling step, then another. It was no longer a graceful, fluid being. It moved like a broken puppet. It looked down at its own hands, as if seeing them for the first time. Then it looked at Dale. And for the first time, through that storm of psychic noise, Dale felt something directed at him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't logic. It was pure, unadulterated terror. The conductor was feeling fear. It was experiencing individuality, and it was breaking its mind. The creature opened a mouth it did not have, and let out a silent psychic scream. It was not the unified scream of the hegemony that Dale had heard before. It was the lonely, terrified scream of a single being, lost in a storm it could not comprehend. Then, with a sound like 1,000 tiny champagne glasses shattering at once, the crystalline plate on its face cracked. A spiderweb of fissures spread across its surface, and the chaotic light within winked out. The conductor shuddered one last time, and then it crumpled to the floor, as silent and still as a discarded shell. Silence descended on the control room, a deep, profound silence that was more than just the absence of noise. It was the absence of the hegemony. For Dale's entire life, the background hum of the Vorlag collective had been a constant, subconscious presence, like the pressure of the ocean on a deep-sea fish. Now it was gone. The water had vanished, and the sudden lack of pressure was dizzying. Dale got to his feet, his body aching. The cryogenic fog was dissipating, revealing the full extent of the chaos. The ruined door, the damaged console, the still form of the conductor lying like a broken statue on the floor. He had made a terrible mess. The janitor in him felt a brief, absurd urge to go find a broom. He stumbled over to the shattered plasteel window and looked out. The lockdown shutters had retracted when the power had surged. Outside, in the blackness of space, the scene was one of quiet, terrifying chaos. The great Vorlag dreadnought, the one that had been a constant, menacing presence for a decade, was drifting. It was no longer a ship, it was a tomb. But the smaller ships, the patrol craft and freighters, were behaving erratically. One was spinning slowly on its axis, its maneuvering thrusters firing at random. Another was flying in a tight, panicked circle, like a bee trapped in a jar. A third simply accelerated in a straight line, heading out into the deep black, destined to fly until its fuel ran out. The Echo had done exactly what Thorn had predicted. It hadn't killed them, it had driven them mad. It had taken a single unified mind and shattered it into millions of individual terrified pieces. Each Vorlag on each of those ships was now an individual with no name, no history of its own, suddenly flooded with 1 billion years of someone else's. They were newborns, trapped in the bodies of monsters, screaming in a language they had never known. Dale watched, his heart a cold, heavy lump in his chest. This wasn't a clean victory. This wasn't a celebration. This was an act of profound galactic-scale cruelty. He had freed his own species by inflicting a fate worse than death on another. He had fought monsters, and he had used a monster to do it. He turned away from the window. He needed to know what was happening on the station. The comm system was dead. He would have to go see for himself. He stepped over the fallen conductor, avoiding looking at its cracked, empty face. He made his way out of the control room and down the corridor. The station was eerily quiet. The emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. He found the first human survivor in the mess hall. It was a young woman named Jenna, an engineering tech. She was sitting on the floor, staring at a blank wall, weeping silently. "Jenna," Dale said softly. She looked up, her eyes wide and unfocused. "I heard them," she whispered. "All of them, singing, crying. I heard my grandmother. She died 5 years ago. I heard her singing a lullaby." The echo hadn't just been broadcast into space. It had resonated through every human on the station. They had all felt it, a brief, overwhelming flash of their shared humanity. For Dale, who had been at the epicenter, it had been a tidal wave. For the others, it was a ripple, but a ripple strong enough to shake them to their core. He found others. Some were huddled in corners, shaking. Others were wandering the halls in a daze. They were all touched by the same beautiful, terrible miracle. He finally made his way down to his own small bunk. The first thing he did was pull the tattered photo of Sarah from his jumpsuit. He stared at her smiling, gap-toothed face. He had done this for her. He had broken a galaxy for her. He hoped with a desperation that was almost a prayer that she was alive somewhere, that she had felt the ripple, that she knew, somehow, that something had changed. He sat on the edge of his bed, the photo in his hand, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he let himself feel the full weight of his exhaustion. He had saved the world. What was he supposed to do now? A crackle from a small, forgotten speaker in the corner of his room startled him. It was the station-wide emergency channel, a system so old and basic it ran on its own independent power. A voice came through, choked with static and emotion. It was a man named Corporal Miller, a security officer Dale barely knew. This is Corporal Miller. Is anyone there? The Hegemony, they're gone. I think we're free. We're receiving signals. From Earth, from the colonies. Faint, but they're there. People are talking. They're singing. There was a long pause, filled with the sound of a man trying not to cry. "My God," the voice whispered. "They're singing." Dale closed his eyes. It was real. It had worked. Humanity was waking up from a long, gray dream. They were free. And he, Dale Simmons, the janitor, was the one who had set them free. No one would ever know. It was a secret he would carry to his grave. And that was okay. He looked at the photo of his daughter. It was enough. The days that followed were a strange mixture of chaos and wonder. The 50 or so humans on Luna -7 slowly came out of their shock, coalescing into a makeshift community. They were like shipwreck survivors on a desert island, an island that happened to be a highly advanced space station, surrounded by the ghosts of their former masters. They worked together. The engineers, led by a shaken but resolute Jenna, coaxed the station's main power back online. The communications officers, their faces etched with a permanent awe, worked to amplify the faint signals trickling in from across the solar system. The messages were fragmented, a jumble of languages and emotions. But they all told the same story. The Vorlag were silent. The hegemony had fallen. Dale went back to work. It was the only thing he knew how to do. While others were trying to rewrite the future of the galaxy, Dale was cleaning up the past. He repaired the buckled door to the control room. He cleaned the frozen residue from the floor. He swept up the crystalline shards of the conductor's shattered face. He did it with a quiet, methodical focus. It was his penance, his therapy. No one asked him what had happened in the control room. They assumed the conductor had been destroyed in the power surge that had knocked out the station. Dale was just the janitor who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was invisible again, and he was grateful for it. He spent his off hours in the communications room listening. The voices of a freed humanity were a symphony. There was laughter from a mining outpost on Titan, an old poem being read on a weak signal from a hidden settlement in the Kuiper Belt, and music. So much music. Guitars and pianos and human voices raised in song, tentative at first, then growing in strength and confidence. For centuries, these things had been contraband, acts of rebellion. Now they were the sound of freedom. One day, a message came through that made Dale's heart stop. It was a clear, strong signal from a transport ship called the Stardust Drifter. It was a passenger list, being broadcast on a loop for a group of refugees that had been relocated from a reharmonization center on Mars. They were looking for family. And on that list, between a Sanjay Patel and a Sophia Rossi, was a name. Sarah Simmons. Dale stared at the screen, his breath caught in his throat. It couldn't be. It had to be a different Sarah Simmons. It was a common name. But then a new message scrolled across the screen. It was a personal addendum added by the ship's captain. To anyone listening, we have a young woman aboard, Sarah Simmons, age 16. She is looking for her father, Dale Simmons. Last known posting was Luna -7. If you have any information, please respond on this frequency. Dale felt the floor shift beneath his feet. She was alive. She was looking for him. The 10 years of silence, of hopelessness, of quiet, gnawing grief, washed away in an instant. He grabbed the microphone, his hand shaking so hard he could barely hold it. This is Luna -7, he croaked, his voice thick with emotion. He cleared his throat and tried again. This is Dale Simmons. I am here, Sarah. I am here. The response was immediate. Luna, -7, we read you. Stand by, Dale. We're patching you through. There was a burst of static and then a voice. A young woman's voice, hesitant and trembling, but a voice he would have recognized anywhere. Dad. Tears streamed freely down Dale's face. He couldn't speak. He could only nod, a useless gesture across millions of miles of empty space. Dad, is that you? The voice asked again, stronger this time. I felt it. We all did. It was like a song, a light. After that, the Vorlag on the ship. They just stopped. They just curled up in the corners and started to cry. What happened? Dale looked around the communications room. Jenna and the others were watching him, their faces soft with understanding. They still didn't know he was the cause of it all, but they knew he had just found his daughter. He took a deep breath. I don't know, he lied, the untruth tasting like ash in his mouth. Something amazing happened. That's all. Something amazing. He couldn't tell her the truth. Not now. Maybe never. How could he tell his daughter that he had saved her by damning an entire species to insanity? They're coming here, Dad, Sarah said, her voice full of a joy that felt like a physical blow. The Stardust Drifter is changing course. They say they can get here in 3 weeks. I am coming home. Home. Luna -7. This cold metal can in the middle of nowhere. It had been his prison. Now it was going to be the site of his reunion. Dale closed his eyes, the tears still coming. I'll be waiting, he whispered. I'll be here. He had shattered an empire. He had remade the galaxy. He had unleashed a psychic apocalypse. But in the end, all that mattered was this. A father talking to his daughter, promising to wait for her to come home. It was a small, simple thing. And it was everything. The 3 weeks passed in a blur of anticipation. The news of the Stardust Drifter's impending arrival turned Luna -7 from a somber outpost into a bustling, hopeful community. Everyone had a role. The engineers worked to clear a docking bay that hadn't been used in years. The medtechs took inventory of their meager supplies. People who had been strangers, united only by their shared oppression, were now a team, united by a shared purpose. Dale was in the middle of it all, but he felt strangely apart. He was a ghost at the feast. He watched the others celebrate their newfound freedom, a freedom he had given them, and felt a profound sense of isolation. His secret was a wall between him and everyone else. They saw a quiet janitor who had gotten lucky. He saw the man who had committed a galactic atrocity for the noblest of reasons. The paradox was eating him alive. He spent his nights by the viewport looking out at the stars. They didn't look the same anymore. Before, they had been cold, distant points of light in a universe owned by someone else. Now they were possibilities. They were question marks. Humanity was free, but free to do what? To repeat its old mistakes? To fight amongst itself now that the common enemy was gone? He had kicked over the chessboard. He had no idea what new game would be played on the board. He thought about the Vorlag. He couldn't help it. He pictured them on their dead ships, or on their silent home worlds, lost in the labyrinth of a billion human memories. Were they in pain? Were they evolving? Was it possible that, out of the chaos he had unleashed, something new and unforeseen might be born? He had planted a forest of human souls in the sterile garden of the hegemony. He had no idea what would grow there. The day the Stardust Drifter was due to arrive, the entire station was humming with excitement. Dale had put on a clean jumpsuit. It was the best he could do. He had tried to comb his hair in the small, cracked mirror in his room and had seen the face of a stranger. There were new lines around his eyes. His hair was grayer at the temples. He was a man who had aged 1,000 years in the last month. He made his way to the docking bay. It was crowded. Everyone on the station was there, waiting to greet the first visitors of a new era. Dale stood at the back, content to be lost in the crowd. He wasn't ready to be the center of anything. A cheer went up as the Stardust Drifter appeared in the viewport, a battered, ungainly-looking transport ship. That was the most beautiful thing Dale had ever seen. It maneuvered clumsily into the docking clamps, the groan of metal on metal a triumphant sound. The airlock hissed. The inner door began to cycle open. Dale's heart was a drum against his ribs. He scanned the faces of the refugees as they began to emerge, pale and thin, but with eyes full of a light he hadn't seen in a decade. And then he saw her. She was taller, of course. No longer a little girl, but a young woman. Her hair was cut short, and she wore the same drab, functional clothing as everyone else. But her eyes, they were the same. The same bright, curious eyes that had looked up at him from 1,000 memories. She stepped out into the docking bay, her gaze sweeping the crowd. Her eyes searched, and then they found him, standing at the back. Her face broke into a smile. It was a smile that lit up the entire room. It was the smile he had held on to for 10 years. The smile he had shattered a galaxy for. "Dad." She ran. She pushed through the crowd, her eyes locked on his. Dale felt his own feet begin to move, as if pulled by an invisible string. He met her in the middle of the room. She threw her arms around his neck, and he held her, burying his face in her hair. It didn't smell like baby shampoo anymore, but it was her. It was his Sarah. He held her tight, feeling the frailness of her shoulders, the strength of her grip. The wall he had built around himself, the secret and the guilt and the loneliness, crumbled to dust. He was no longer a ghost. He was a father holding his daughter. "I missed you," she whispered into his shoulder, her voice thick with tears. "I missed you too," he said, his own voice breaking. "Every day." The crowd around them gave them space, their quiet respect a gentle bubble in the noisy room. In that moment, surrounded by the family he had found and the daughter he had lost, Dale felt a sense of peace. He still didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if he was a hero or a villain, but he knew that this right here was worth it. This was the reason. This was enough. In the new Galactic history books, the ones that would be written on screens and spoken in classrooms for 1,000 years to come, the fall of the Vorlag Hegemony would be known as the Great Silence. It would be a mystery, a miracle. Scholars and scientists would propose theories. A spontaneous system-wide cascade failure, a previously unknown stellar phenomenon, a religious event. They would never know the truth. They would never know that the greatest event in human history was triggered by a tired scientist, a desperate janitor, and a love for a little girl with a lumpy clay bird. Life on Luna -7 settled into a new rhythm. The Stardust Drifter stayed, its crew and passengers swelling the station's population. It became a beacon, a waypoint in the newly opened frontier of space. More ships came, carrying news and supplies and stories. A new society was being forged in the shadow of Jupiter, a society built on cooperation and second chances. Sarah stayed with Dale. They had 10 years of lost time to make up for. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their separate lonely lives under the hegemony. She told him about the reharmonization center, the quiet grayness of it all. He told her about his life as a janitor, about the endless, repetitive days. He left out the part about the control room, the conductor, and the button that changed the universe. The secret remained his alone. Sometimes he felt a pang of guilt for his lie. But then he would see Sarah laughing with Jenna over a shared meal, or helping one of the comms techs tune a new frequency to catch music from a distant colony. She was happy. She was free. His lie was the cage that kept the monster of the truth from hurting her. It was a burden he was willing to carry. One evening, he and Sarah were in the observation deck, looking out at the stars. The dead Vorlag dreadnought still hung in the distance, a massive, dark tombstone in the sky. A salvage crew was scheduled to arrive in a few months to begin the long, grim task of taking it apart. "Do you ever wonder what happened to them?" Sarah asked quietly, her reflection a pale ghost in the playsteel. Dale looked at the dead ship all the time. "People say they just broke," she said, "like a machine that was run too hard. But I don't know. The moment it happened, when the song came, I felt like I was connected to everything. To you, to everyone. Maybe they felt it too. Maybe it wasn't that they broke. Maybe it was that they were finally opened." Dale considered her words. Opened. It was a gentler word than shattered. He thought of the conductor in its final moments, its mind flooded with alien memories of bicycles and lullabies. Had it been torture? Or had it been a birth? "Maybe," he said. It was the most honest answer he could give. The future was unwritten. Humanity was a messy, chaotic, beautiful and terrible species, and they were now unleashed upon the galaxy once more. They would build great things, and they would do terrible things. They would love and hate and create and destroy. They had been given back their freedom, with all its glories and all its perils. Dale looked at his daughter, her face illuminated by the light of distant, unknown stars. She was the future. She and all the other children of the Great Silence. They would be the ones to build the new world. His role was over. He was, and always would be, a janitor. A man who cleaned up messes. He had made the biggest mess in the history of the galaxy. And now, he would spend the rest of his life quietly, contentedly, watching his daughter and her generation clean it up. He reached out and took her hand. Her grip was strong and sure. Outside, the universe waited, silent and vast and full of possibility. And for the first time, Dale Simmons didn't feel afraid of it. He felt something that felt a lot like hope.